If you are in grade 11 or 12 and you are doing RT as a subject in the school, then you probably know about a PAT or a practical assessment task. And here are videos about how we can do some tips and ideas. And this video, we're going to look at how we can graph data, how we can show data from our database normally and show it in some sort of bar chart or column chart. And we're going to use shapes to do that. There are lots of ways of doing it. We've got another video which we're going to use a special component called a T-chart. But in this, we're going to do some complicated algorithms to try and do it using shapes. Let's see how we do it. My suggestion before we get into this video is that you only use this video once you've done all the basics and you've done everything else that you need to. This is like a nice extra little bit at the end. But make sure that you've done like the insert and the delete and the edit from a database and showing basic statistics. This one is going to be for the little fancier thing when you want to show some sort of graph of some stats from a database. So let's get to the example. So first of all, let's have a look at our database. So we've got a bit of a database here where we've got some items for, like, for example, stock for a shop. And we've got a little list of item names. We've got some item prices. We've got some item stocks. And we've got the category that each of the items fall in. Okay, so that's the data in the database. You can see the fields and stuff like that. So first of all, I need to do the setup. How do I want to display the data in my database? Now, the first thing I'm going to do, I've actually done it ahead just to save time. I've created a panel. Then let's reveal the panel. Ta-da! There we go. There's our lovely little panel. So we want to use this panel to graph the data. I'm going to do some sort of column chart. So you can imagine these are going to be like little columns. Okay, so things like that. So there's my panel. And on the panel, I have put some shapes. I've made them very small and put them at the bottom there. So there's my shape. I've called them SHP1, SHP2, and so on. And I've put little labels underneath it. So I'm basically constructing a chart the way you would want it to be viewed. It's not the ideal way to do it. As I said, in our next video, we'll have a look at a T-chart. But let's just see what we can do with this. And I've got a button. When I click on the button, I want to populate it with the data. Okay, so that's the first setup. Create all your values. I've got 6 little columns and 6 little labels, which will put what the thing is underneath there, whatever that column represents. And so that's what we can do. Now, on the show stock button, what we are going to do is we're going to, based on a particular category, we're going to base on a category. So let's say I take the fruit category or the, let's say the fruit category. It must go and find all the fruit. I don't know if there are the fruit. There's some fruit. Find bananas, and I want to find out how much stock is available. Okay, so let's say there are 22 bananas. So the one thing that we need to be aware of when you are doing it this way, you need to understand what your upper limit and your lower limit is. So if I take that shape, so if I make that shape's height, let's make its height. Where's the height property? So at the moment the height is 8. If we make it like 200. Let's see what it looks like. So 200 in that direction. Okay, it goes in the opposite direction, but there we go. It looks something like that. So we don't want to go more than 200. Do we agree? So that makes sense. So think of your scale. Think of what your biggest item is going to be, because you want to get it within that range from 0 until 200. So, for example, if your range is 0 to 100 and you want to get up to 200, then you can just double everything. So your 1s will become 2s, and so a 50 will be 100, which will be halfway, and like 98, which is close to full, will be close to the 200 mark. So think about your scale. So let's leave it like that for now. So that's what we're looking at. You must think about your scale, and we want to show the stock available of the items in that category. So when I click on the button show stock, here we are. I've got a couple of variables I've declared already. We're going to use them now. The other thing that you need to do, or what I would suggest, is to make my life easier, I actually want to control these components via an array. So I'm going to put all of these shapes into an array and all these labels into an array so that I can just use an array to go through all of them and updating them automatically. That'll make my life a lot easier. So how did I do that? Well, at the top here, I declared an array of columns, array col, which we've got 6 of them, of type T shape. Yes, you can make an array of a component type. So each array column, square bracket 1, will be of type T shape, and so on. And array labels of type T label. So there we go. That's the first bit. And then I need to actually assign, there's a link between that particular shape, SHP1, must be linked to position 1 of the array col. So what I want to do here is I'm going to say array col, you have to do this manually, is equal to SHP1. So take that shape and put it basically into col1, so we know there's a link between the two. There's another way we can do that. I'll show you that later, but let's just do this for now. Boom. And I'm going to paste that 6 times. and we're going to do that. Basically, that's going to go from 2 to 6, or 4, 5, and then the positions in the array will be 6, 2, 2. So just going backwards now. 3, 2. So that way we've assigned all the shapes to a particular position in the array. And you're going to do the exact same thing for the labels. So there we go. I did the labels already. So basically the same idea. And then we need to know which category we're looking at. Now I've got a scat variable, which is going to be which category. I'm going to manually just give it a value here. You can obviously use an input box or some sort of combo box where they can select which category, and then it will display the chart for that particular category. But I'm just going to manually put one in just so for testing purposes. And then I need to keep track of which column we are working with. Are we working with the first column, the second column, and so on? So I've got a column count. Okay, so we've got a nice little column count, and I'm going to initialize that to 0. So our col count is equal to 0. So initialize it to 0. Okay, so that's what we can do. Now what I'm going to do is I want to basically go through the database table, and it's called ADO items. I think it's on a particular data module over there. And I want to go through. The moment I find a fruit, I want to go get the name of the fruit from item name, and I want to get the value of the stock. So we said that the stock won't go more than 100. So we know we can just double that by 2. So we're going to display it by 44. So that's going to visually represent 44 out of 200. In other words, that's what it's going to visually represent, its position. And then we're going to find the next fruit, which there is a pineapple. So we'll say there are 13 pineapples and so on. So you get the idea of what we want to do. So I want to see like the different fruit names here. And this must go up and go, hey, this is how much of that fruit we've got. Okay, so that's ideally what we want to do. So we're doing all of this inside the data module. And the data module is called DM pat example, if I remember correctly, with pat example do. So begin, end. So there we go. So remember your with when you're dealing with data modules, that's the end of the with. There we go. So what are we going to do? We're going to go through that database, ADO items, I think it's called. ADO items. Waiting for it to pop up. There we go. Dot first. Remember your algorithm of traversing through a database. While not ADO items dot end of file. And inside the while, we're going to do some stuff. And at the end of the while, before we go, we're going to go ADO items dot next. So that's your algorithm of going through, traversing through a database, making sure that you go through each and every record. So that's the end of the while. Okay, so I first only want to do this, obviously, if the category matches the category we're looking at. So this is quite a specific one. So if scat is the same as ADO items, where do we get the category from? Well, we get it from that field, the category field. If the category field equals that category field, if that's the same, then we've got a fruit. And what do we want to do with the fruit? Well, we want to display that fruit. So first of all, we are dealing with the first column. So I'm going to say, hey, col count, or increase our col count, because now we're dealing with column 1. Okay, what do we want to do? Well, first of all, I want to get the label. So the LBL, now I don't want to use LBL1, I want to use array labels, because the array labels are in there, and I want to use the first one, and then I want to use the second one. Well, whichever one I want to use is based on which column we're doing. So I'm going to actually base it off of col count. So for the first one, it'll be get the first label, work with that label, and then when we do the next one, col count will be a 2. We'll deal with that one, and so that's how we're dealing with the different components. And then if that will equal to whatever the ADO items is, and we want the particular item name, if I remember correctly. If we go here, item name, that's what we want. So item name, I think it was one word. Go put that there. So there we go. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. But we want to put that in the label. Remember, that whole thing's a label. So I can't just put it straight in the label. What property of the label? It's the caption of the label. Must equal it. Remember, each one of these is a label. So that's why you can take that array.caption. So that particular label's caption. So that's how you can access the fields of the different ones. Okay, so now we need to try to figure out how we're going to do the height of this Magoti. How are we going to do that? Well, as we said, remember you thought about your range. We want to go from 0 to 200, but we actually only go from 0 to 100. So whatever the value is, we want to double it. So we're going to do the following. I'm going to say, okay, the array, we're dealing now with the shape. So the array col. And we're dealing with the first one, or our col count in this case. Now that one, we want to deal with that particular height property, the height of it. I want the height of it to equal whatever the ADO table's value is in the stock field, which is the item stock field. You saw there, item stock. The item stock field. Take that field, and this is times about 2. Remember, we on a scale, or whatever the value is, we'll just times about 2, and it will do that. Let me put that quote there. So there we go. So take that value and times about 2. So that's the first thing we're going to do, and then once we're done, go to the next one, and so on and so on. Now, I don't think that's going to work very well, but let's test it and see what it does. Okay, so let's test it. So let's see what our chart's going to look like. So there we go. Let's have a run. Let's test it. I'm going to click on the button. It's that one. And there we go. Oh, well, we got our bananas and apples and pineapple and apples and all that listed. Obviously, there are only 4 fruits, so we got to find a way to get rid of those later. But you see that when we made it bigger, it went down. Okay, so that's not actually what I want. I want it to actually go up. So how do I do that? Well, it's a little bit of a sneaky little thing I'm going to do here. I'm going to change the array column, not a column, array column. I'm going to change its starting height before we change, or the starting top value. Basically what I'm doing is, we know that it's going to move down, so I'm going to move it up, and then when it changes the height, it will move it down to where we want it to be. So we need a bit of mathematics here. So the array col, what property do you want to change? You want to change the top property. I want to change it to what I want to do. Whatever the top property is at the moment. Whatever the top property is at the moment, I want it to go up the amount that we want it to go down, if that makes sense. So if I can explain the mathematics, what we're doing is we want it to go up 22 or 44, for example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it up 44, so that when it moves it, if it changes the height, it goes down 44. So I need to take what its current height is and add or make it go up 44. Now remember, the height value, it's 0 at the top here. So to make something go up, you actually got to minus it, make it smaller. So we're going to minus this amount so that it moves the height up, the top value up there, so that when it changes the height, it moves it stays there at the top, but the rest of it will flow down to there, if that makes sense. So I'm taking whatever the current top value is, I'm going to minus the amount that we're going to change the height by. So I'm just going to actually copy that and paste that there. So mathematically that is going to work. So as I said, we're going to change the height by a certain amount, but it's going to go down. So let's make the top value go up to the same amount that's going to move down. So then it moves down to where we want it to be. So let's try that. Let's see if that works. Okay, so one little change. There we go. And boom, there we go. That looks a lot better. So you can see there's a nice little value. You could also use panels. So that's an idea I thought about now. You could use panels, and then you could change the caption of the panel if you want a particular number, how much that value is in there. That would also work, because you can also use panels like shapes. Same with the height and all that, and change the colors and so on. So you can do that type of thing. So that's quite cool. Little things that we want to finish with this is we don't like to have these random things at the end that aren't working. So we need to find a way to get rid of any excess. So that's the one thing that we must do. So let's try get rid of the excess columns that we don't need. So for that, once we've done everything, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a for loop that goes from, well, we know the col count will be, for example, like a 4 if we do 4 of them. So we want to go from the col count plus 1. So from the fifth one onwards to 6. Okay, to the 6th one, because we want whatever's left over up until the 6th one. What do we want to do? Well, we want to get rid of the particular bar or the columns that we've got there. So the R col R. So the 5th one, for example, that dot, let's say dot height. You could easily just make it a 0, or you can make it visible. Let's make the height equal to 0, because then it'll disappear. And then the caption of the array will probably need to go. So the array label, there we go. Labels are dot caption. We must change to nothing. So there we go. So we go up until 4, then from 5 till 6, just change the height to 0 and the caption to nothing, so it disappears. So if we do something like that, then we actually hide them. And that solves our problem if we haven't got if we've got too few. So there we go. So that's quite nice. Okay. The little problem is what happens if we've got too many. So for example, if we've got, I think there are lots of canned food. So if I change the category to canned food, okay, is it canned food? I think it's canned food. Canned food, yeah. If I change it to canned food, I think there are too many, there are more than 6. And that might cause this to crash. So when I click on it, it goes, oh yeah, there's a problem. Okay, so we're accessing extra stuff. Obviously, and the labels are not appropriately sized and stuff like that, so you've got to find a way around that. So little things that we need to do. So we only want to do this while our col count is, for example, so we only want to do this part if our col count is less than 6 or less than equal to, or yeah, it's less than 6, because when it becomes 6, we must stop doing it. So we're going to keep doing this while not end of file, and at the same time, and while our col count is less than equal to 6. The moment it becomes 6 over here, boom, stop doing it. It's equals to 6. We don't want to do it one more time when it's 6. While it's less than 6. So while it's less than 6, it'll increase to 6. When it becomes greater than 6, then it should stop. So let's try it. So this will only obviously do the first 6 of them. If they're more than 6, it'll only ever do the first 6. Obviously, it's the limitation of our scenario. So there we go. So that works a little bit better. Obviously, these fields are a problem, so because they don't fit. So you would need to do things like, for example, I'll just tell you what you can do. Is on these labels, you would do things like setting their auto size to false and making them, I would make them a particular size. You make them nice and big like that, and then you set the auto size to 0, no, or not 0, to false, and then you make it wrapped text. And then you can, I would then suggest making the font a little bit smaller. And that way, if you play around with that, you can probably get all the text to fit in, irrespective of how long the text is. So you can do that with testing. Do that with a little testing. Let's change it a bit smaller to the font size quickly. We make the size a bit smaller, something like that. And then hopefully that would allow it to fit in. You can play around with that to try to get it to fit in. The only other issue that I think we might come across if we run it, for this scenario, there we go. So there, it fits in a little bit better, so you can do that with the other fields. Is if I click on it again, you see it starts doing some wonderful things. So I would you just need to maybe do some sort of reset in the beginning. So once you've done everything, make sure that you reset all them. Now that they're all in an array, you can easily reset everything together in one go. You can go from 1 to 6, and you can do things like, okay, we just want to set everything from the beginning. In other words, we want to set, it's the actual columns that are just jumping up for no reason. So column R dot, we want to get it all to be starting at its current position. So the top value is what's always changing. So the top value is 216 at the moment. So change them all to 216. So before we start drawing the columns, we just set them all to 216 so they're all set. So if we click on it again, it's going to keep on redrawing them, but reset them back to the bottom. So if we do something like that, and if I click on it again, it stays there. It doesn't move around. So there we go. That's a nice little example for that. I'm going to do one quick one where we use another scenario, another way of using this exact thing. We can use the same type of ideas, but I'm going to use the average stock. So let's go look at that particular one. So we're probably going to have to do something like this again. So we're going to have to do something like along those lines again to allocate, because we did this obviously in that button. So we want to do it for this button. I've got so much big space here. Let's get rid of all the space so we can make it a bit thinner. There we go. All together. There we go. So over here, we're going to have to probably assign all those values again. And then what I'm going to do is, in this case, we want to create an average stock by the category. So for example, the fruit category, I want to see what the average stock is. And then the vegetable and the canned food, I want to have the averages. So for that, what's quite nice is you can integrate arrays into this. I know we just did that there, but I've got an array here of categories, which I went from 1 to 6, and an array of totals, which goes from 1 to 6 of all the totals. Now you can play around with how to populate those arrays. You can do it manually like this, or you can use some sort of way of going through the database and finding the individual values. You could do something along those lines, but we're going to do that. So we've allocated the values. So what I'm doing is I want to put into array total. So over here, I want to put into array total position 1 what the average is of the, what do we call, the average item in stock for the bakery. And then in position 2, we want the average stock for canned food. So it's a parallel array. So position 1 here relates to position 1 there, and so on. So that's using parallel arrays. So let's go and populate the data. There are lots of ways of doing it. I'm going to do it a very long way, which is going from 1 to 6. We know there's 6 categories. And so for each category, I want to do the total in that. So for each category, I'm going to go through the database. So we're going to do our with pat database, pat example. It's a DM pat example, a DM pat example. So that's my with. So this is the end of my for loop. Make sure that you know which is your different end. So we're going to do lots of things with this. There we go. End of with. And then we're going to do our normal algorithm where we go ADO items dot first, while not ADO items dot net or end of file. And let's go begin end, and this is the end of my while loop. And at the bottom of this while loop, we can go ADO items dot next. Okay, so there we go. So all I'm doing is trying to find the average. I've got a sum and a count. Okay, so for each one, so at the top of each one, we're going to do this. Okay, so at the top of each one, we're going to set our count to 0, and I'll do this inside the loop because when I start R being a 2, I want to basically do a new average. So that's why we reset them inside. And I'm going to basically go, okay, so here we go. If ADO items, and we're looking at the category field. If that category field is the same as the value in the array category at position R. So R is going to become a 1. It's position 1. So we're looking at whatever's in position 1 is bakery. So we're going through this whole database, adding up all the bakeries, and then R will become a 2. Then we'll go through the canned food options and so on. So that's what it's doing. If it's equal to the same as that, then we want to work out the average, which means R sum is equal to R sum plus the value in stock. I think it's item stock, if I remember correctly from the previous example, item stock field. And we want to increase our count so that we can find the average. And then once the loop is done, we can say, hey, array totals, I think it was array totals, square bracket R, because we're dealing with R, the first one over there, so we must actually be inside the for loop. Yes, we are. R, so the first one for bakery is going to be equal to the sum divided by the count. Now, we're going to keep it as integers because we want to use the top value for this. So I'm just going to round this off because remember, you can't divide into an integer. I think that's an array of integers. So I'm just going to do that. Okay, so there we go. So that's going to populate the array with all the totals that I want. Now that I've done that, now it's actually quite easy because now I know there's 6 categories. I'm just going to go, okay, here we go. Now we're going to do another for loop over here. This is a different one for 1 to 6. And now we are going to do pretty much the same thing as what we did earlier, which is something along these lines. Okay, so I'm just going to copy these. We don't need to increase column count because we've got a loop that's doing that. And I'm literally going to paste this in. Now, where we don't use column count, we're going to use R, because R is going to be the column that we're referring to. So the first column, where do we get the caption from? We get the caption from the array category, because that's the parallel array, category R. And then the actual R value for this one will be the R value there, and it'll be not from the item stock. Where are we getting? We're getting this from the average total, which is array total R. So that is the difference there. So that's the value that's always been changed. So we're not getting an individual value. We're using the array's values to populate the graph, not the value. We used the database to populate the array, and now we're just doing the final results for that. And let's try that out. Let's see if that works. So that's my average. It's doing its thing. There we go. And if I click on average stock, there we go. We can see, obviously, we can adapt, as I said earlier, we can adapt the particular fonts and stuff like that to make it all fitting. But there we can see the value of the bakery and the canned food in comparison to each other. Okay, so there we go. That's that. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you is just how we can do this part a little bit easier. So instead of doing that, what you could do, and this is some fancy footwork we're going to do here, some new stuff we're going to learn. We can do this all, for example, in a for loop. We know that there are going to be 6 components each, so we're going to do a for loop from 1 to 6. Okay, so how can I do all of this in one line? Well, well, I'm going to use the begin end here. So we can say array column square bracket R is equal to, now I basically want an SHP plus an int to string R, if that makes sense. So I want the word SHP plus the int to string 1. That's why I labeled it shape 1, shape 2, because then I can do something like this. Now if I do something like that, I need to find that particular component if I want it as a string. So I'm going to use what's called the find component function, which takes that there, okay? And we're going to find that component. Now that whole thing must be so that whole component will find whatever that component name is, and so it will find that as a T shape. And let me close the bracket there. So let's first test to see if that works. So basically it says take that SHP, add on a 1, find that component, make it a T shape, and that goes into our col position 1. So we just replaced all of those lines, those 6 lines, with something like this. So let's try it and see what it looks like. Does it do the same thing? There we go, it still works. So basically that means we can then do the exact same thing. I can just copy this actually and paste it. And now we're going to do the same thing with the labels. We're going to say the labels, array labels, is going to be find the component with LBL plus shape 1, and that's going to be a T label. And by doing that, we basically done all those 12 lines of code in one little for loop with 2 lines each basically. So there we go. So that's what you could do. So there we go. Still works. Okay. So there we go. So try that out if you want to do that using shapes to do your graphs. For other RTPat tips, go to our YouTube channel, click on that subscribe button, leave a like, leave a comment, go to the playlist and you'll find more tips and they can help you with your pat. And remember, don't do it the long way, do it the Mr. Long way.